Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1018 just came out. And no, I'm not in my usual setup. Once again, I'm traveling. This time I don't really have a picturesque, scenic background. I'm just in a hotel. It's the morning. I just read the chapter. Let's just talk about it, okay? So, this chapter, there's three major things I want to talk about. One, the turn of the tides caused by Tama. Two, the actual action happening between Jinbei and Who's Who, like the actual fight aspects of it. And three, the crazy information dump we're getting out of Who's Who right now. Like, who would have thought that this character would know this much information that is kind of crucial to the world? He seemed like an interesting member of the Tobiropa, probably the most interesting member of the Tobiropa, at least to me at first. But for him to know all of this, for him to be this important, we will get to him in a second, but before any of that, I would strongly recommend watching this video of mine, The Dawn of One Piece. Strongly recommend it. I think it is one of the most in-depth analysis videos I've ever done. I strongly recommend checking it out in light of this chapter, because yes, we just got some information that I will delve more into as we talk further about this warrior of the sun, Nika, and a lot of us talking about, that's Luffy, etc., how that reflects on Luffy, how Luffy's probably going to fill that role. Please watch the Dawn of One Piece video if you want to see just how far this rabbit hole goes and how deep Oda has been weaving in this idea of Luffy representing this sort of messianic figure who is symbolized by the sun in a way and what he's bringing to the world. Like, this runs really deep throughout all of One Piece in a lot of pages and quotes and panels that you would not expect. Like, it's a much bigger picture that Oda has been crafting for a long period of time now that he's only finally starting to really make explicit, right? With people talking literally about the dawn of the world. Straws will bring the dawn of the world, this sun, this warrior of the sun, etc., etc. So, we'll get into that more later on, once I get to Who's information dump, but strongly recommend watching that video. Look, YouTube algorithm is going to promote a bunch of other chapter reviews after watching this one. You don't need any other chapter reviews. You've got this one. So go watch that Dawn of One Piece video instead. And then if you got a little extra time, maybe watch The Natural Enemy of the Gods, because that applies as well here. So, anyway, besides all of that, let's talk about Tama turning the tides. I think that things are going very well for the Alliance, obviously. It's pretty cool to see all of these random minor comical gifted enemies just gathering around the Alliance as like old friends that they're picking up. Right now, we've got prison guards, we've got we've got all of these just random minor little inconveniences from back in Act 1 and Act 2, just joining up, gathering forces, and it feels kind of like, you've seen this a million times before in movies and other manga, anime, etc., where all of your friends that you made along the way pop up to help you, right, during the final battle. Here, they're all acting like they're those friends when really they were just enemies that they've had to face and been hindrances along the way for all of these characters. But they're just acting buddy-buddy with them because that's just how Tama's fruit works. It feels like, oh yeah, all of the friends that we made along the way are just joining forces to help us, when really this is just the effect of pure brainwashing, which I think is hilarious. Also, I think that Usopp being left off the ride is, just another funny little gag that I enjoyed. So, things are going well for the Alliance. Some might say too well. I am some. It's going too well in my opinion. I really hope that, you guys know what I hope for. So, we're not even going to touch on that, right? People tell me that I talk about the raid failing too much, so we're not going to touch on that. Let's just move on. Let's talk about Who's Who versus Jinbei. So, Oda literally calls people like me out towards the beginning of the fight, where Oda points out that the idea that fishmen are slow in combat is apparently a discriminatory view. Now, if you remember from my last chapter review, that is one thing I talked about. I said Jinbei is a boring fighter. He provides for a boring fight because he's too slow in combat. Oda just told me I'm racist. Good thing that Jinbei is represented by India, and I am Indian, which means that I cannot be racist against Jinbei and his kind. So I think I'm in the clear there. But apparently, the belief that fishmen are slow fighters on land is a racist view to hold. Now, I have watched Jinbei for hundreds of chapters across numerous fights and skirmishes, and I promise you, he has never moved like that in the past. I'm telling the truth when I say that most of his fights consist of slow punches and boring throws where he just grabs someone and flips them. Again, I don't think I can be racist while saying that because Jinbei is Indian. So apparently Indians are just slow, boring fighters in the One Piece world. That's cool. It's rough now that I'm represented by Jinbei because that means that Jinbei has to be my favorite character. So it's just unfortunate that my favorite character sucks so much. But Oda is apparently claiming that Jinbei is actually really fast. I guarantee that that is the fastest we will see him move for the rest of this fight. That one little move. Alright, guaranteed. Also, I feel like I'm proven correct by the way that this chapter ended, which was a slow punch. What kind of punch takes like 3 panels of wind-up? Alright, so, Jinbei slander aside, I think it is a really, really fun fight that we're getting. Because, one, obviously we're getting a lot of little, I guess, bits of information, exposition, and not really, like, just lore information, right? World building, etc. information woven throughout this fight. So that makes every panel really interesting, but the actual choreography that's going on, really, really, really cool. It takes me back to the CP9 days where now we're just, like, it feels fresh that suddenly we're getting more Rokushiki techniques, which, I don't know, I thought it was a really interesting fighting style when we were really getting the CP9 battles. So I even back then, I thought that it made for some really, really cool martial arts fights because there's so many different ways you can use it. Who's Who obviously stresses a lot of the use of his fangs for a lot of his attacks and techniques, but I like the fact that we're getting back into that because I always felt like, yeah, Rokushiki made for like some very visually entertaining fights because they can do so much. They can fly around, they can throw long-range attacks, they can have hard-hitting close-range attacks, they can move at extremely fast speeds. It just makes for a really, really cool visual choreography, right, for a fight. So, I think the coolest panel that we got out of this was Who's Who. You know, there was that big spread of Who's Who basically ramming into Jinbei with his fangs, and Jinbei basically having to defend against that. And what I thought was really cool about that panel is that it just looks a lot like a shark attack, if that makes sense, but with Who's Who actually the shark in this scenario and Jinbei as the victim. So, I don't know, I think that that was one of the best action panels, honestly, that we've gotten in Onigashima and One Piece in general. I think just the way that Who's Who is drawn in that panel is really, really, really just a kind of nightmare fuel, if that makes sense. So I think overall the fight has been really entertaining. We have, despite what I've said that, you know, Jinbei doesn't make for the coolest fights, I think at least the fact that Who's Who is making it such a dynamic fight, that makes it so that, you know, Jinbei getting a throw in here or there, or like his punches in, etc. You know, even if he's a bit more of a stationary fighter, I think the fact that Who's Who is throwing out so many different angles of attack at him does make for a fairly interesting fight. So, I actually enjoyed this chapter just on a pure choreography sense quite a bit. I think even outside of all the information we got, I would have thought that this was a great chapter just from the action that we got, because I think this is actually one of Oda's better fights in recent memory. The way that it ended, I don't think that that's the end for Who's Who, right? It would be a little weird, I think, if that's the end for Who's Who, just because this chapter was mostly just him saying a lot of stuff, and then, you know, Jinbei kind of just, like, ignoring a lot of it, and then the chapter ends with Who's Who just getting punched out. I don't think that that's the end of the fight. I do hope that we get to see an awakening form from Who's Who, because, you know, again, if the Impel Down Guards were able to do awakening, I would fully expect that a character like Who's Who, such an important figure, a genius of CP9, top henchman of Kaido, etc., would be able to do Zone Awakening. So I'm really, really looking forward to that next chapter. Hopefully that creates more of a challenge for Jinbei. Jinbei so far is handling it all pretty well, and that's considering that he is a little bit injured already from the henchmen of Who's Who kind of swarming him earlier on when it was kind of an unfair, not a 1v1 situation. So, I think choreography-wise, really, really enjoyed this fight. Hope to see more of it next chapter, potentially. Hope to see Who's Who going awakening. Yeah, Who's Who going awakening. Who's Who awaken form next chapter. Beyond all that, the interesting stuff, the story of the Sun Warrior. So we're getting a lot into the idea of prophecy and everything like that, right? I'm not too bothered about the Sun Warrior stuff, just because it, again, to me so far, it still feels, as long as Oda is going the route of, you know, legends foretelling of someone rising to the role of this, you know, the next Joy Boy, the Sun Warrior, etc. A lot of these things can be tied together, right? Similar to how the idea of the One Piece, but the empty throne, etc. Those things are tied together. Like, a lot of One Piece works so well because you can tell that the culmination point of where a lot of the ideas come together at once is going to basically check off a million different, like, loose threads at the same time. Again, even something as simple as All Blue and the destruction of the Red Line, right? So the idea that I think the Sun Warrior, in my opinion, like the way I'm just going to rationalize it at the moment, again, go watch the Dawn of One Piece video. Go watch the Dawn of One Piece video because I'm not going to reiterate all my thoughts from there here, okay? But it's a lot. All I'm going to say is that the Sun Warrior, I almost feel like it's almost unnecessary to add in just because it's become so clear throughout various quotes and various characters right throughout the series that, yeah, Luffy is essentially the Warrior of the Sun. That's what he's represented throughout the entire story, traveling from island to island and essentially bringing light to each island that he goes to, and his ultimate destiny being to wipe out the darkness that engulfs the world, which is the world government, end the long night, as Pedro has said, bring the dawn of the world, as the rest of the Minks have said, as the samurai have talked about. So it's just so many things already pointed to the idea that Luffy is the one who brings the sun. He is the Warrior of the Sun. This just mixes in with what we already kind of knew that Luffy's destiny was going to be, and it just mixes in with the idea of, you know, Joy Boy and everything like that, right? So there's a difference, I'll still say, between the notion that Luffy was born like automatically destined to be this Sun Warrior, and he was born essentially with it already written that he was going to free the world from darkness, versus the idea that somebody is going to do that. They've been waiting hundreds and hundreds of years, centuries and centuries, for someone to be able to rise to that role, and Luffy is just going to be the one capable of filling that in. That is the route that I much prefer. I think that there's differences between that. I might do a longer video at some point talking about, just because it's becoming a bigger point of discussion, the idea of fate and what destiny really means in the One Piece world. One thing that I definitely hope is that, you know, I'll say this, like, I just don't want to see a lot, like, I believe in Oda to do things that are unpredictable. So even if Luffy is destined in some way, I believe in Oda to make it so that there's some sort of twist in it or some sort of Luffy-esque angle to all of it. But I still also hope that Luffy is not just born essentially as the destined chosen one, just because it's such a tired trope. And I've seen people saying, well, no, Oda's been writing about destiny from the beginning. And no, it's a lot more complicated than that. That's a very, very shallow take to just say, well, Oda wrote fate in chapter 100 or chapter 99 or something like that. Therefore, this has always been the case, and you should have known that. That's ridiculous. That's a very shallow take on how the entire series has handled the idea of fate and destiny in the series, because it's a lot more complicated than that. To say that we've always known that Luffy was the chosen one from the beginning is just a blatant lie and revisionist history, because that is not how people talk 200, 300 chapters ago, right? So it is a complicated subject. It's going to be very interesting to see how Oda handles all of this. And I do think I want to release a video maybe in the near future just talking about the scope of what fate and destiny has meant in the series so far, or how it has been implied to be so far, and how this new information that we're slowly getting about Joy Boy, Chosen Ones, Warriors of the Sun, etc. plays into all of that, and how it can still be a very coherent sort of vision that makes sense with how we felt the story was early on, without it feeling like Oda is necessarily going down a very tired cliche trope of Chosen One and kind of diminishing a little bit, I think, in many people's eyes, maybe not everyone's, but diminishing a little bit in some people's eyes, what Luffy is doing and what story we've been reading. So, all of that aside, just Who's Who himself, I'm very interested, one, in, you know, what CP0 might do with regards to Who's Who if Jinbei does not kill him, because Jinbei is most likely not going to kill him. Regardless of whether or not Jinbei wins this fight, Jinbei is not going to kill Who's Who. I can pretty much guarantee that. So are we going to see an assassination attempt on Who's Who? I don't know. And two, I really want to see what's up with that guard that gave Who's Who this information. Who was that? Right? Who was that guard that gave Who's Who this information? I still think most of this is pretty much, it was kind of made clear that this seems, at least, I'm going to take it at face value, that this is unrelated to Fisher Tiger's stuff. That was kind of just a little segue, I suppose, Oda used to justify why Who's Who is talking to Jinbei about all of this, the Fisher Tiger connection. So Fisher Tiger, or the Sun Pirates, etc., that gives kind of a logical excuse for Who's Who to be talking about all of the Sun Warrior stuff, all of this lore to Jinbei, even if that's not actually connected. So I'm just going to assume for the moment that that's why. Maybe there is a connection, and we'll find out later, but at the moment I'm just going to go face value, say like, okay, these things are not connected. But the guard that told Who's Who about this, I'm really interested in who that is and who that turns out to be later on in the story. So, that's all for this video. There is a very, very, very big announcement coming out Sunday, by the way. So stay tuned for that. And lastly, go watch the Dawn of One Piece video again. And talk to you all next week.